Hello, hello, and welcome back to Metroid Monday on Shatter Our Soul. And so, today we're going to be taking our first dip into Sanctuary Fortress, as well as finishing out the last of Torvus Bog. Now, I've grown to respect Bog a little bit more in the recent playthroughs. It's always been that area that I never really understood 100%, and it always left a bad impression. It's not that it's a bad area by any means, in fact, quite the opposite. It is simply that I lacked the ability to fully understand and appreciate what it is that this region is trying to offer. So, short, so quick, short and sweet statement. Torvus Bog is pretty okay. But we're going into what I consider to be the best area in the game. And I'd say that with no reservations. Whereas other areas have been, change of palette, a change of pace. The Sanctuary Fortress is significantly larger and has far more going for it as far as an individual one-to-one basis than any other region in Metroid Prime 2. It's not even close. So, for me, this is the episode, the moment where I truly begin to fall in love with this game once more. The Sanctuary Fortress has my favorite color scheme in the entire franchise. The lighter blues, the active electronic inner workings moving throughout, the technology that is used to both maintain and automate the facilities of the Sanctuary Fortress that are also used for the duration or used in defense that are able to set off small localized EMPs that are capable of shutting down Samus's suit, if only temporarily, all play a huge part in what makes this particular region so memorable. Whether it's the Ing Smashers, the Quadraxis, they all have something to show. And so today we're not just we're going to be dipping our toe into the Sanctuary Fortress and hopefully showing just a little bit of what makes the Sanctuary Fortress so memorable for me, so unique. Now, admittedly, if you put the Sanctuary Fortress next to some other locations from other video games or other franchises, it has a tendency to stick out on its own. A lot of the, shall we call it, space age, high fantasy type games, or space age fantasy games, that's what I'll call it, all have very unique aesthetics that if you were to put Halo, Dead Space, Borderlands, and Metroid side by side, you could tell which franchise each location was from at a glance due to aesthetic and art direction alone. It is this exact moment the light of aether returns the blue sky to Torvus Bog, that the weather becomes more stable, and that aether is now sitting at 5 of 8 fragments of the light of aether on the light side. This is the turning point. The point where further progress is going to demand heavy sacrifice. Where the battle between the Ing and the Luminoth shifts in favor of the Luminoth. If there is one thing that I could state as being I suppose, the best representation of this franchise, I would state that Prime 2 is better in terms of its aesthetic, its world building, than Prime 1. I would say that Prime 3 had the best chance of investing new players into this franchise. I would say that Metroid Dread has the best representation of the 2D gameplay in the entire franchise. Metroid has a habit of putting out high quality games. Even the ones that were considered low quality or that were made before the tech had reached the point that it was actually able to show off what the franchise could be capable of. Metroid never shied away from harder games. They never shied away from their mentality of growth and building up or challenging conventions of the medium. Prime 2 is a lot less of a, shall we say, generic copy paste compared to Prime 1. It has areas that it could be better, as with anything, but Metroid Prime is meant as an adventure. It's meant to showcase the power of the system in some capacity. Really send the player to another world. And I find that Prime 2, more than 1 or 3, has the ability to really put the player in Samus's shoes. The contextualization that's done in the initial opening of Prime 1 really does a lot for the building up of this game. It makes every interaction have weight to it. It's understanding that in between every single area that Samus goes through, every single action, every single enemy that she defeats, is a step towards ending a war of sorts that could potentially save the lives of an entire species. It's not something that anyone could bear lightly. And yet, despite the fact that Samus more or less stumbled into it, she's taking everything that happens in this context in stride. Now, I suppose an enemy type that kind of bugs me is Metroid Prime 2. Is what I will call or in the Metroid Prime series as a whole, are what I'll call the teleporting enemy. In Prime 1, these were the Chozo Ghosts. In Prime 2, it is the Space Pirate Commandos. And in Prime 3, I admit I don't know anymore. I'm sure I'll run into it in the near future. But each game has those teleporting enemies that are harder to track down. And it does make for some interesting gameplay and allows the use of new upgrades to try to build up Samus to be able to handle that threat more readily. But in spite of that, Ow. Prime 2's variant I always found the most frustrating to challenge. They exist in kind of a in-between, where they're too hard to defeat before you have the right weaponry and the right tools, and too easy to avoid, where you can hide in a corner until they leave. Anywho, Umos here has you must travel to our fortress high in the mountains. The last temple lies in the fortress. Seek knowledge there before invading the Ing High. Be cautious in the fortress. This place was once guarded by machines of our creation. They are now corrupted slaves of the Ing. They will not try to take your trespass lightly. The light of aether shall guide you. Which is just a fancy way of saying, go to the next area, go beat some stuff up. Honestly, I really like the fact that you have a guide of sorts throughout Metroid Prime 2. Prime 1, your guide was just your suit doing scans throughout the entire world, trying to find locations of strange energy sources. Prime 2 says no, that's not the way it's going to work. And that you have Umos acting as a guide of sorts, explaining where the next major threat is, the easiest and weakest, or easiest and hardest areas for Samus to infiltrate. I think it says a lot about Samus's capabilities that she's even able to infiltrate these locations in the first place. Unfortunately, Samus is also dealing with, I suppose, a return to the beginning of the game. This is the route that she took to get in to the temple in the very first episode that was made for this particular series. And so having a separate route in does kind of showcase how far you've come. That pathways that were deemed possible at one point became completely immovable walls. We've gotten to a point where Samus can get through those walls with relative ease. Oh boy. The space pirates, however will I deal with these? And see, this version of the space pirates is much more similar to the ones that we deal with in Prime 1. They're significantly weaker. They lack many of the staples that make the characters or make them generalized threats to begin with. They become more of a simple task to dispatch. Yes, I know I have the map of this area. Why I didn't get the map in the beginning of the game is beyond me. This also marks one of those regions that showcases just how much further ahead the opponent is compared to Samus. These guys are automated turrets. They were built built to act as sentries against the Ing. Their job was relatively simplistic. Keep the Ing away. The turrets themselves, while they are notable and reasonable to keep around, are incredibly difficult for Samus to deal with. Or, not difficult, irksome. Irksome to deal with. You also get the moment as you enter this room, where it becomes incredibly apparent just how dangerous the fortress actually is. The entryway to the Sanctuary Fortress is littered with bodies of the Luminoth. The entire point of this section is shown right from the beginning. This was the last stand of the Luminoth prior to Umos taking on the role of responsibility and was willing to sacrifice himself in a last-ditch effort against the Ing, hoping that if he succeeded, his people could live on. And if he failed, his people wouldn't have to suffer. It's a very dark reminder of just how grim this franchise gets. The Sanctuary Fortress. Now, one of the things that I like and dislike about this region is the atmosphere outside of the area. You can see tendrils of what looks like moving electricity wiring floating in midair. It doesn't necessarily fit with the perceived motion area around it. Metroid Prime 2's Sanctuary Fortress does have a lot of, I suppose, unique aesthetic decisions. Oh, right, the shielded enemies. Oh, careful, there's a cliff there. Anywho, these guys don't look like they're the teleporting kind, so... Oh, geez, no wonder I'm getting bumped around a lot. There's two of these guys here. And he tanked a missile to the face without even flinching. Well, fairly flinching. The Prime 2 Sanctuary Fortress is supposed to be slightly more straightforward than Prime 1's Phazon Mines. No, that's the opposite. It is very much the opposite. The final area of each game got more complex as the franchise went on. The Phazon Mines was a railroad of sorts. It pushed you forward regardless. Your goal was as simple as it got. Get to the end. Prime 2 does have that same mentality. Get to the end. This is the final gauntlet, the final major challenge before the end of the game. And yet, it shows off that navigation within the franchise has evolved since the early days. Samus now is able to travel throughout the Sanctuary Fortress with ease to wherever needs to be seen. Wherever she needs to go, she can go. The fortress itself is battling back against Samus. Oh, is this another one of... Yep. Okay, Dark Visor. As I said, the fortress is fighting back against Samus. The locks that are in place on one end don't necessarily affect the other. And vice versa. So, Samus might be stuck in one location in the light world, but can use access to the dark world in order to be able to circumvent it. And so this area becomes the most integrated region of the game, making navigation between A and B heavily reliant on an understanding of the differences between the two different maps. Okay, we have the head of the smaller robots. Ironically, I think the smaller robots would actually be harder to defeat than Quadraxis is. Because the bigger you make something, the more room for error there may be. Of course, it's, vice versa. The smaller you make something, the easier it is to break. But the thing is that when you scale something up to 20, 30, 50 times its size, any design flaws are going to become more apparent over time. I think that says a little bit about how Quadraxis is designed, because it is just a simple guardian, a simple sentinel. But that simple sentinel is dealing with being put on a scale that it was never designed for. Oh yay, I get light ammunition for a gun that I don't need ammunition for. Okay, that was a jerk move. These guys have the capability of firing off an EMP. This EMP shuts down Samus's suit in its entirety, meaning that if I get caught in a circumstance where it does shut Samus down, while it is easy enough to reboot the system, it is another reminder of just how advanced the Luminoth were, as well as how advanced the suit is. Every single piece of the machine gets shut down in an instant. Every single piece has to be rebooted in its entirety when dueling against these guys. And sometimes I think that's great. Sometimes I question it a little bit. I don't know. If I may ask, what is your favorite region of the trilogy? I've already put my cards down that the Sanctuary Fortress is my favorite, with my second being Skytown from Elysia in Prime 3. But each person has their own viewpoint on the series as a whole. What works in my mind might not work in yours, and every player has their own unique perspective on design principles. There are some things that are designed well and most people can understand and acknowledge it. This is one of those times that I believe that there's a lot going on and that it's a little bit more subjective. Okay. Amber. Right. Has to be put together in the exact perfect way. Got it. So, Amber, I believe it's blue? I'm having to toss up between green and red. I'm gonna go with green. Nope. Okay. Amber, blue, red, green. It's not the hardest puzzle to solve. It's more just trial and error. There's nothing really showcasing, or there's nothing that tells you the code prior to your arrival. It's just a guess and check circumstance. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So far in this area, we've come across the Sentinels, which are those little four-legged dudes, and the Ing Smashers. The Ing Smashers are the golems that kind of they take the place of the elite pirates in Prime 1. They're they are designed in a combat mentality to be virtually the same. Oh, this doesn't bode well. Let's get these guys out of the way, I guess. The best of my ability. When they do the little tornado thing, I've always found it's best to use a boost ball at them. It stuns the base, which allows for easier access to the second phase of the fight. And because the body has so much lower health than the head of the Sentinels, it really is in my opinion, the easiest way to take them down. If you go for the head first, the body will continue to attack until you can deal with it, or until you can get rid of it. So it's kind of a ease of access situation. The faster you can get them down to the heads, the faster you can kind of deal with the entirety of the battle. I don't know. I might be overlooking some things, but personal preference is there. So I finally figured it out. And it might come as a shock to some. It might just be confirmation for some. I've been mentioning throughout this that I believe that the weapons in Prime 2 are weaker than the Prime 1 variant. And I figured it out. So, if you look at the Prime 1 variant of the Plasma Beam versus the Prime 2's Light Beam, the Plasma Beam, more often than not, only takes one single shot to light mid-sized enemies on fire, which suggests a higher heat capacity than Prime 2's variant. This is to say, in no uncertain terms, that the Prime 2 variant is colder than Prime 1's. The Dark Beam also cannot freeze or stop enemies in place as quickly as the Ice Beam does. Those are the two weapons that function the most similarly to Samus's weapons in Prime 1. Now, part of this is just that enemies in Prime 1 aren't as bulky as Prime 2. And part of it is because the elemental variants of Prime 1 were meant to be more generic, whereas the Prime 2 variants are more situational. They work better in this particular environment where they are dealing with the harsh environments of dark aether and the enemies that have adapted to those environments. Oh, Kablowie. Alright. So these guys are... how do I put it? They are the dark aether variants of the probes that fire electricity. If I would have remembered at the time of recording that these guys are weak to strong light energy attacks, which it's pretty easy to output in the form of a charge beam, I probably wouldn't have stood there for as long as I did. But be that as it may. We're also going to take we're running a little bit short on time here. A little bit further, I think. We're going to head, I think, to the light world on the area just above. I think that's going to be the best stopping point for tonight. One minor complaint I have is that the Ing don't really get stronger throughout the game. It's not to say that they're weak by any means. They start out as very formidable enemies. It is simply a statement that their growth is stagnated throughout the game. That the difference between Ing at the beginning of the game and the end of the game is minimal at best. Um, the beginning of the game's Ing is, well, the exact kind that we fought at the very beginning. The difference between the beginning and end game Ing are numbers and location. They increase in number in the late game, which is reasonable. You got to scale up the encounters in some capacity over time. But aside from scaling up in that way, there's not very many noticeable differences between them. Anywho, let's keep on rolling. Oh, I think this one's an impassable wall. It looks like it should be reasonable, but I'm drawing a blank. All right. Did I accidentally supercharge this? Oh, Sonic Security System. Yep. Annihilator Beam and the Echo Visor. The Echo Visor is kind of unique in how it's presented. It doesn't really... It doesn't handle situations in the same way that other visors throughout the franchise have treated it. It's much more, I suppose, neutral in terms of its output. But anyways, if you like what you see, drop a like, leave a subscribe, and we'll catch you next time. Until then, I hope you have a good one.